Oddly enough, violence can feel like the right thing to do, almost as if we have a moral obligation for retribution. At least, we should be allowed to take tooth for a tooth, right? Or maybe even an eye for a tooth. But just because we think or feel that violence is justified does not make it so. Violence has the ugly characteristic of gathering momentum that deepens and worsens the initial offense, leading to more pain, more heartache, and simply more violence. We see this dynamic in the rift between two brothers, Nephi and Laman. Both kept insisting that they were chosen to lead the family, one citing divine decree, the other invoking the right of the firstborn. What started as unresolved disagreements soon led to physical quarrels and attempts to get rid of the other. In the bitter end, the family was split in the middle, leading to two separate people, two nations that soon went to war with each other. A war and hatred that was inherited from one generation to the next for hundreds of years. The fact that violence simply doesn't lead to lasting solutions can be seen in another account in the Book of Mormon, the example of Captain Moroni. As much as the narrator, Mormon, adores this general, the wars Moroni fights just breed more wars. The prime example of this is Moroni's general Teancum, who first kills the Lamanite king Amalickiah, who is soon replaced by his brother Ammoron. When Teancum succeeds in killing Ammoron 6 years later too, losing his own life in the process, the enemy is beaten back for a time, but soon returns under the command of Ammoron's son Tubaloth. And so the war continues. Yet amidst all this turmoil were a bunch of young men who received something they didn't quite deserve. The sons of the Nephite king Mosiah were fighting a war of their own, trying to destroy the Nephite religion which they deemed foolish and vain. Their rebellion caused much harm, yet their parents prayed for the welfare of their sons and their friends. As a result of these fervent pleas, God sent an angel to stop them on their way. Faced with the power and love of God, they repented and repaired the damage they had done to the cohesion of their own people. But their desires for making restitutions did not stop there. Having been extended the hand of mercy, undeservedly so, they were ready to do the same to the Lamanites, the people that most Nephites still considered their enemies, worthy of death and destruction. So instead of going to war, they went to their enemies' lands to cure them of their hatred. What happened next counts as one of the greatest miracles ever recorded. After initial struggles, imprisonment and setbacks, swaths of Lamanites were moved by the love of the sons of Mosiah, so much so that they let go of their hatred, proclaimed religious freedom in all their territory, and even forsook violence with a covenant to never again spill the blood of another. This monumental shift came too fast for some parts of the Lamanites, leading to internal instabilities. The new converts soon took a new name upon them, the Anti-Nephi-Lehis. And while opinions over the meaning of this name are manifold, it did one crucial thing. It drew a line right in the middle of the Lamanite people. And it looked like this line would soon become a battle line. To add to the crisis, the king died with all these challenges unresolved. The fact that he anointed his eldest son as a successor did little to heal the rift, especially after giving him the ceremonial name of Anti-Nephi-Lehi. As a result, the regional rulers almost immediately abandoned their allegiance to the royal house. Soon, an army of Lamanites was rolling towards the Anti-Nephi-Lehites. But these people, who felt they had been freed from the burden of hatred and violence, were unwilling to respond in the usual fight-or-flight reaction. They didn't freeze in terror either. No, instead of taking something from a brother, they had covenanted that they would rather give. And so they marched out to meet the approaching army, unarmed and without intention to fight. They knelt down and prayed as the swords began to descend upon them. Over 1,000 Anti-Nephi-Lehis were slaughtered, but their sacrifice worked something almost peculiar. Instead of taking advantage of the lack of resistance, the Lamanites were thunderstruck by it. Killing someone who raises a sword against you quickly feels justified and easy. but killing someone kneeling, that felt wrong. And more than that, it hurt their conscience, so much that their hearts were stung with deep regret and a burning guilt. When their own hatred was not answered with hatred of its own, but with love, their wrath lost all justifiableness. All their makeshift reasons to inflict violence were suddenly blown away. Instead, the warriors were faced with the hurt of what they had brought upon another human soul. And so the attack came to a sudden halt. Many of the attacking Lamanites joined the Anti-Nephi-Lehis that day, and the rest left, seemingly unable to kill people who genuinely cared about them. The actions of the Anti-Nephi-Lehis are counterintuitive, of course. We could argue that many of them did die, and while the deaths of those in the front rows is cause for lament and grief, we have to ask ourselves, what would have happened if they chose the path of violence? Wouldn't even more people have been killed on both sides? And what if their own army would have been overrun? What would have happened once the Lamanites descended upon their wives and children? The loss of life among the Anti-Nephi-Lehis is a tragedy, even when we have trust in God that their souls are saved. But by choosing love over violence, these brave men worked a miracle all of its own. They protected their families from war and from another round of hatred. They stopped the cycle of violence before it even gathered much momentum. The rift among the Lamanites could have become another centuries-long war or even a genocide, but instead, violence was stopped in its tracks. Resentful dissenters from the Nephite nation eventually made it necessary for the Anti-Nephi-Lehis to seek protection among the Nephites. Yet their willingness to perish rather than to kill remains. Their pride, courage, faithfulness to their covenant, and love for their brothers echo across the centuries, beckoning us to not take an eye for an eye and to resist retribution, violence, and hatred. Their example is a promise that by so doing, we will avoid deepening pain, loss, and grief in our own lives, our families, our communities, and nations, and that we will manage to build bridges over long-lasting chasms, healing relationships in miraculous ways.